At first glance, Burkina Faso is a landlocked nation tucked deep in West Africa, often overlooked on global maps and dismissed as one of the world's poorest countries. But on September 15th, 2025, something happened that stunned not only Africa, but the entire world. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a leader many outside critics once dismissed as just another military ruler, stood before his nation and unveiled 10 mega projects worth billions of dollars, projects that would sound ambitious even in Washington, Beijing, or Berlin. Imagine this: a nuclear power plant rising from African soil, the continent's very first, built not by outsiders, but through a direct partnership that guarantees technology transfer and energy independence. A national gold refinery no longer letting billions slip into foreign banks, but keeping value where it belongs, inside Africa. 50,000 kilometers of new roads weaving together villages, markets, schools, and hospitals. An airport with a runway big enough for the world's largest aircraft. A university hospital, a water system serving over 1 million people, electric vehicles powered by Africa's own sun, and even a satellite launched into space. These are not the dreams of a politician chasing votes. These are bricks, steel reactors, and roads already under construction, forming the backbone of what may become the most radical transformation Africa has ever seen in peacetime. And here's the real question for us, especially for those watching from America. How did a small landlocked country, where barely 21% of people had electricity just a few years ago, suddenly become the nuclear pioneer of an entire continent? Is this the dawn of a new African century? Or is Burkina Faso simply racing against time, risking everything to break free from Western dependency? Before we dive into the details of all 10 projects, tell me this: which of these do you believe could change Africa the most? Energy, gold, roads, or satellites? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe that real leadership is measured not by promises, but by concrete action, then please subscribe and ring that bell. Because today you will see how Ibrahim Traoré is not only rewriting Burkina Faso's destiny, he may just be rewriting Africa's. On September 15th, 2025, under the bright Ouagadougou sun, President Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward with a declaration that shook the very foundations of Africa's development narrative. It wasn't another speech filled with abstract promises. It was a blueprint, concrete, costed, and already underway. 10 mega projects interconnected, designed not only to lift Burkina Faso, but to set a precedent for an entire continent. For decades, Burkina Faso had been labeled a least developed country. Barely 1 in 5 citizens had regular access to electricity. Roads connecting rural farms to cities were broken or non-existent. Gold, the nation's richest resource, was exported raw, refined abroad, and re-imported at a price Burkina Faso could not afford. Every economic artery seemed to flow outward, bleeding value into foreign capitals. That was the status quo until Traoré tore it apart. The announcement began with Project 1, the nuclear power plant. On June 21st, 2025, Traoré signed a historic agreement with Russia's Rosatom to build Africa's first indigenous nuclear facility. The details were staggering: a 5-year construction timeline, complete technology transfer, and a guarantee that Burkina Faso, not foreign consultants, would manage and operate the plant. Minister Yakuba Zabriguba called it the turning point of our century, while Rosatom's CEO Alexei Likachev confirmed that training programs for Burkinabe engineers were already underway. For a nation where 79% of people still lived without steady electricity, nuclear energy wasn't just an option, it was liberation. Then came Project 2, the National Gold Refinery Complex. On July 9, 2025, construction began on a state-run facility capable of refining 400 kilograms of gold every single day, up to 150 tons annually. Until now, all of Burkina Faso's 57 tons of annual gold output had been shipped out for processing, with profits siphoned away by foreign corporations. But under this new plan, gold would no longer leave the country raw. Jobs 5,100 of them would be created. A national vault would store the reserves. Anti-extraction task forces would secure the refinery day and night against sabotage. As Traoré put it, only the wealth of our land should build what will protect that wealth. Next was Project 3, the Chisinau Mega Cement Factory. Opened on March 20th, 2025 in partnership with Chinese engineers, this plant immediately began producing 2,000 tons of cement daily, with expansion potential to 1.2 million tons annually. Unlike past arrangements, this wasn't about China taking resources and leaving. Local raw materials were used, local jobs, over 400 of them were created, and local engineers were trained to run the technology. Cement, often overlooked, is the backbone of construction. With this plant, Burkina Faso would no longer depend on costly imports. Roads, hospitals, schools, and houses could rise from Burkinabe earth. But perhaps the most ambitious was Project 4, the 50,000-kilometer road network. Spanning 2025 through 2029, it is the largest road construction program in African history. Over 900 domestically operated machines are already carving through the countryside, connecting villages to markets, linking remote farms to schools and clinics, and creating trade routes across the Sahel Confederation. No foreign contractors, no foreign supervisors, just Burkinabe engineers for Burkinabe people. In the words of one construction worker interviewed at the site, "We are not just building roads, we are building the veins of our nation." Finally, Traoré unveiled Project 5, the Danson International Airport, a $200 million investment located 30 kilometers northeast of Ouagadougou. With a 4,000-meter runway long enough for the world's largest aircraft and modern terminals, this airport is set to transform Burkina Faso from an isolated landlocked state into a regional hub. Cargo facilities will slash logistics costs. Tourism will rise. Investors from Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America will have direct access bypassing Western-controlled hubs. Each of these first 5 projects revealed a pattern: energy, resources, construction, infrastructure, connectivity. They were not isolated achievements but pieces of a larger puzzle. Nuclear power would fuel factories, gold refining would fund infrastructure, cement would build the roads and airports, the roads would connect the markets, the airport would connect the world. For years, Burkina Faso had been written off as a footnote in Africa's long struggle with poverty. But Traoré's unveiling marked a rupture. It was a statement that Africa's poorest could become Africa's pioneers. The true climax of Traoré's announcement came not with words, but with the breathtaking scope of the remaining projects. Each one seemed to defy the very idea of what a so-called least developed country could accomplish. Project 6, the Bobo Dioulasso University Hospital. Standing on the red soil of Burkina's second-largest city, bulldozers roared as construction began on what is set to be West Africa's most advanced medical facility. For generations, families had to sell their land or cross borders just to seek care for treatable diseases. Now, a modern hospital would rise equipped with advanced laboratories, surgical theaters, and a medical school to train Burkinabe doctors instead of sending students abroad. Traoré's team emphasized that this hospital would not only serve Burkina Faso, but also Mali, Niger, and Côte d'Ivoire. For the first time, West Africans could look to Ouagadougou and Bobo not only as centers of politics, but as destinations for life-saving care. Project 7, the Ziga 2 Dam and Water Project. Water had always been Burkina Faso's most fragile resource. The original Ziga Dam, built decades earlier, could no longer support a booming population. By 2025, the capital's taps were running dry, sparking daily protests. Traoré's solution was colossal, a new system pumping 135,000 cubic meters daily, enough to serve over 1 million people. Underground pipelines, treatment plants, and sanitation systems would secure clean water for generations. Mothers who once carried jugs on their heads for miles could imagine a future where water flowed from a tap inside their homes. Project 8, domestic electric vehicle manufacturing. When Traoré announced that Burkina Faso would begin producing its own electric vehicles, even his critics fell silent. Could a country struggling with basic infrastructure leapfrog into green technology? The plan was bold: harness the Sahel's sunlight through solar farms, build charging stations across major cities, and use Burkinabe assembly lines to produce clean vehicles for the region. This was not just about cars, it was about breaking dependency on imported fuel, slashing costs, and proving that Africa could lead the world in renewable innovation. Project 9, Burkina 1. The hall gasped when Traoré revealed that Burkina Faso would launch its first national satellite. For decades, communications, agriculture, monitoring, and weather data had been controlled by foreign systems. But now, a Burkinabe-made satellite would orbit the Earth, providing independent telecommunications, crop monitoring for farmers, disaster management, and environmental protection. For the first time, the skies above Africa would carry a signal owned by Africans themselves. Students at Ouagadougou University cheered when told they would help analyze the data, proof that this was not just technology, but education, sovereignty, and pride. Project 10, the Sankara Mausoleum. Finally, Traoré closed with a project rooted not in steel or concrete, but in memory. The Thomas Sankara Mausoleum, a monumental complex honoring Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, would include museums, classrooms, and spaces for national celebrations. A nation that forgets its heroes, Traoré declared, will always be enslaved. By tying modern industrial transformation to Sankara's vision of self-reliance, Traoré connected past sacrifice to present ambition. The emotional resonance was unmistakable. Crowds wept, applauded, and chanted Sankara's name. The reaction was electric. In Ouagadougou, construction workers left their shifts and filled the streets waving flags and singing national songs. Farmers in rural villages said they finally believed their children would see electricity and clean water in their lifetimes. Students flooded social media with hashtags like Wanagana Africa Builds and Traoré Vision, calling it the African New Deal. Internationally, the response was sharper. In Moscow and Beijing, the projects were hailed as proof of successful South-South cooperation. Russian media called Traoré the nuclear pioneer of Africa. Chinese outlets celebrated cement factories and road networks as victories for mutual development. But in Western capitals, skepticism reigned. Critics in Paris and Washington dismissed the announcements as propaganda warning of unsustainable debt and creeping authoritarianism. Yet on the ground in Burkina Faso, the projects were real steel beams, rising foundations, poured machines roaring. The true climax was not just the announcement itself, but the symbolism. Burkina Faso, long dismissed as fragile and poor, had declared itself an architect of Africa's future. 10 projects, each one extraordinary on its own, were now bound together into a national transformation plan that felt less like politics and more like history being written in real time. The ripple effects of Traoré's 10 megaprojects were felt immediately in the daily lives of Burkinabe citizens. What once seemed like distant promises were now visible realities altering the social fabric of the nation in ways no one could ignore. Roads as veins of the nation. By 2026, bulldozers had already carved new routes across the countryside. Villages once cut off by seasonal floods were now linked to markets, schools, and clinics. Farmers spoke with wonder about selling tomatoes and millet in Ouagadougou within hours, rather than watching their harvests rot by the roadside. A teacher in Koudougou said simply, "My students now arrive on time. The road gave us back time itself." These 50,000 kilometers of road were not just asphalt, they were arteries pumping life into forgotten communities, and politically, they gave Traoré a legitimacy no ballot box ever had. The airport as a gateway. The completion of Danson International Airport carried more than planes, it carried symbolism. For decades, Burkina Faso had been defined as landlocked. With the opening of a $200 million hub, that label no longer held. The country now had a direct line to Moscow, Beijing, and the Middle East bypassing Paris. Local businessmen proudly called it Burkina's window to the world. Tourism boards predicted a wave of visitors, while cargo operators spoke of slashing shipping costs by half. The political impact was clear. Burkina Faso was no longer a periphery, it was a hub. Health as sovereignty. The Bobo Dioulasso University Hospital quickly became a continental talking point. Mothers from Niger brought sick children across the border while Malian students applied for nursing programs. For the first time, Burkina Faso was exporting not raw resources, but medical expertise. Domestically, citizens interpreted this as proof that the government valued their lives. "We no longer need to beg France for visas to treat our sick," one father told state television. This struck a deep political chord. Sovereignty was no longer an abstraction. It was hospital beds, medicine, and trained doctors. Water as stability. The Ziga 2 Dam calmed a crisis that once threatened the government's survival. In 2024, Ouagadougou had seen protests over empty taps and parched fields. By late 2025, with 135,000 cubic meters of new water flowing daily, the mood shifted from anger to relief. Women who had marched in protest now stood in line to collect clean water from new neighborhood taps. Politically, this was a masterstroke. By delivering water security, Traoré not only diffused unrest, but transformed skeptics into supporters. Technology as pride. The launch of BurkinaSat-1 in 2025 produced an explosion of national pride. Citizens crowded cafes to watch the live broadcast. Social media lit up with messages of astonishment, from donkey carts to satellites in one generation. For young people, it was a vision of possibility. They could dream not only of farming or migration, but of aerospace engineering and innovation. This technological leap reinforced Traoré's political message: Burkina Faso was no longer a pawn, but a player. Yet with all this came political risks. By concentrating power in the presidency and sidelining traditional electoral processes, Traoré's government opened itself to accusations of authoritarianism. Western diplomats whispered about debt traps, foreign influence from Russia and China, and the silencing of dissent. Inside Burkina Faso, however, the calculus was different. Citizens saw roads where none existed, hospitals where none had stood, and jobs that had once only been dreams. The broader civil consequence was a subtle but profound shift in identity. For the first time in decades, ordinary Burkinabé felt not just subjects of a fragile state, but participants in a rising nation. National pride surged. Songs praising Traoré filled the airwaves. And yet beneath the celebration, a quiet question lingered. Could this rapid transformation hold under the pressure of foreign pushback, internal expectations, and the relentless test of time? When the news of Traoré's 10 megaprojects broke, the shockwaves traveled far beyond Ouagadougou. In Moscow and Beijing, the projects were hailed as milestones of South-South cooperation. Russian state media called Burkina Faso Africa's nuclear pioneer, while Chinese commentators highlighted the cement factories and road networks as proof that Beijing's development model was winning influence across the continent. In both capitals, Burkina Faso was not just another partner, it was a showcase. But in Washington and Brussels, the mood was far less celebratory. American think tanks began publishing reports warning of strategic overreach by Russia in West Africa. The nuclear deal in particular raised alarms. For U.S. policymakers, the idea of Rosatom building and transferring nuclear technology to a Sahelian state was almost unthinkable. Was this about peaceful energy, or could it one day tilt toward military capacity? The anxiety was real. European leaders, especially in Paris, reacted with sharp skepticism. France had long considered Burkina Faso part of its historical sphere of influence. The thought of the country building a refinery to keep gold out of French banks or an airport that would bypass French-controlled hubs was nothing short of an economic threat. French newspapers described Traoré as a new Sankara, but the tone was not admiration, it was warning. In the United States, commentary was divided. On one side, foreign policy hawks dismissed Traoré's program as a mirage, a showpiece propped up by Russian and Chinese backing. They warned of unsustainable debt corruption and the erosion of democracy. On the other side, a smaller but growing chorus of analysts asked a more uncomfortable question: if Burkina Faso, landlocked, resource-constrained, and politically unstable, could push forward with nuclear power, electric vehicles, and satellite technology, why couldn't other African states do the same without perpetual aid dependence? The symbolism was powerful. Burkina Faso, with fewer resources than Nigeria or South Africa, was now launching satellites and building reactors. For older Americans watching from afar, it carried echoes of history. It felt almost like the New Deal era, when the U.S. itself had undertaken massive public works to escape the Great Depression. The roads, dams, and hospitals Traoré promised were not so different from Roosevelt's vision, except here it was happening in Africa without permission from the IMF or the World Bank. The geopolitical implications were clear. If countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger could deliver tangible progress outside Western frameworks, Africa's relationship with the global order might change forever. No longer just recipients of aid, they could become equal partners or even competitors. But in Washington, the deeper concern wasn't just about Africa. It was about influence. Could America afford to watch Moscow and Beijing define the next century of African development? Or was there still time for a U.S. strategy that treated African sovereignty not as a threat, but as an opportunity for genuine partnership? For American viewers, particularly those over 60 who lived through the Cold War, the echoes are unmistakable. This feels like a new great game, except the battlefield is not missiles or proxy wars, but roads, hospitals, and satellites. And the question hangs heavy: will the United States respond with openness, respect, and collaboration, or with fear, sanctions, and resistance? The answer may determine not only Africa's future, but America's credibility in the 21st century. 10 projects, 10 bold strokes on the canvas of a nation once dismissed as forgotten. In less than 3 years, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has charted a course that others said was impossible: nuclear energy in a land where electricity was a luxury, gold refineries where wealth once leaked abroad, and satellites launched from a country many could not even locate on a map. This is not the story of a politician giving speeches. It is the story of a leader building structures that will outlast him. But with progress comes peril. History teaches us that when small nations assert independence, whether by refining their own resources or declaring energy sovereignty, they become targets. Already whispers echo in Washington, Paris, and Brussels. Economic pressure, sanctions, or worse could be waiting. The same powers that applauded African elections and empty reforms may find it unacceptable when an African nation builds real infrastructure with non-Western partners. For the people of Burkina Faso, the transformation is tangible: roads connecting villages, water flowing into homes, hospitals rising from the ground. For Africa, the symbolism is undeniable. If one of the poorest, most landlocked nations can rise, then no nation is too weak to dream of sovereignty. And for the world, especially America, the question is pressing. Will this be seen as a threat to old systems or as an opportunity for new alliances built on respect? Viewers over 60 may feel a strange familiarity. This looks like Roosevelt's New Deal or the American highway system in the 1950s, projects that stitched together a nation. The lesson is simple: infrastructure is not just about steel and concrete. It is about dignity, pride, and the right of a people to shape their own destiny. But there is also a warning. Such speed, such ambition carries risks. Can these projects be sustained financially? Will corruption or foreign pressure derail them? And perhaps the most delicate question of all, do you think that President Ibrahim Traoré's national reform strategies are truly effective, yet can we continue to trust him? Or should Africa prepare for someone else to carry this vision forward? I want to hear your thoughts. Which of the 10 megaprojects do you believe will have the greatest impact on Africa's future: nuclear energy, gold sovereignty, roads, or satellites? If you feel proud to be among the first to understand this transformation, please share this video. If you believe the truth is more important than the headlines, subscribe and ring the bell. Because in Ouagadougou, history is not just being written, it is being built brick by brick, reactor by reactor, road by road. And the world is watching.